Welcome back to the Everyday Innovation Podcast. Today, I am joined by Chuck Copenspire, a spicy business and content coach, SEO expert, marketing expert, multi-passionate creative, and host of the Anti-Professional podcast. I was recently on Chuck's podcast, I think it was episode 7, where we had an amazing conversation about a lot of things on innovation and tech. Today, I want to return the convo and the favor, turn it around onto Chuck and speak about a lot of things that are anti-professionalism, creativity, queer entrepreneurship, all the good stuff. So if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to start with a couple warm-up questions. That sound good?
That sounds great. Thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. So I like to ask people who are like creators, solopreneurs, what are you learning right now? What are you diving into? Because I feel like we're always reading a new book, studying something new, diving into a new hobby. What are you into right now?
I would say there are two things. I would say there's one thing that I think I just recently mastered, which is, the whole chat GPT.
Mm,
I feel like I've really mastered prompting it. And now I just wrote an ebook in like 2 days, and that was super
amazing.
easy. I mean, everything I do, I can infuse it with my voice, and that makes it so much simpler to just crank out stuff so much faster than I could. But the other thing that just clicked for me is I've always loved marketing. I've always loved, cracking the code for sales for neurodivergent people. But I just learned about launching, like the actual flow of a launch.
Mm.
And I'm working through my first big launch right now. And I feel so empowered with the new information that I got from my new coach, Captolia, that I'm obsessed with it. And I can't wait to master it so I can share it with more people.
Oh my gosh, it's amazing. So you're saying that like in this whole launch process, it's launching kind of for the neurodivergent brain or the kind of different, or is it more kind of like you're saying that you're realizing some new and different things just being in the neurodivergent category?
I would say it's been a gap for me, and I haven't found an
Mm,
authentic way to approach launching until
yes.
I saw Captolia really like lay it out in a formulaic way. And once I have the formula, I can always kind of shift it to kind of fit my zone of genius, I guess. And now that I kind of have the codes, I feel like I can help other people navigate it now, which feels like I just filled a major gap in my knowledge.
Absolutely. I can relate to you. I identify as neurodivergent as well. So I feel like launching is one of those things that can feel either way too formulaic or if there's not a structure that's there that I can kind of play around with or change to my systems, it makes a lot of sense. So I'm looking forward to hearing your take on that because I don't know, I just feel like you're gonna have a really cool way of presenting that information.
Thank you.
So the other thing is this is actually kind of fun. So another podcast guest gave me these fun prompt cards, and I've kind
Cool.
of selected a few just so there's not something totally off the wall and random, although that's kind of fun too. But I did pre-select a few. I'm going to shuffle them, and then I'm going to see what comes up. I'm going to say it's the
Cool.
universe that gives us a fun thing to slide us into our combo.
That sounds great.
Okay. So it is. What is something you wish you had more time for?
Oh,
Oh my gosh, I can imagine you're
yeah,
multi-passionate like me. You're like everything.
yeah. Well, yeah, and as I'm also a parent. I also have chronic fatigue, so I feel like there's kind of like I wish I had more time for everything, but I
Yeah.
think what I really wish I had more time for was slowness.
Mm,
Just the space to not feel like I have to be in a rush all the time, especially when I'm with my daughter. Like I wish that it didn't always feel so crunched and that I could sort of slow down to the speed of childhood, as they call it, and just like,
yeah.
you know, sit with her and let it be just a little bit more like not so pressurized. And that's something I'm developing
And
as
it's
I'm
and
sort of
it's tough
breaking free.
too with the
Yeah.
entrepreneurial mind. Like a lot of times we kind of get in the trap of wanting to either, be as efficient with our time as I think that's also a neurodivergent thing too. You just
Hmm.
want to be as efficient with your time as possible. You want to make sure that everything you're doing is so incredibly intentional. And sometimes it's hard to see that playtime or that like restful time as intentional when really it's maybe the key to unlock, you know, something really special. Kind of going from there, just because you mentioned it, I know we've talked a little bit about that sort of in the first couple of questions it's come up, like that inclusivity and accessibility in entrepreneurship. And I know that's something that you like to focus on with your clients and in the projects that you do. Can you tell me a little bit more about your experience with chronic fatigue and how that's kind of inspired you to address that in this space?
Yeah. Well, I would say I'm really fortunate that I come from a computer science background, which kind of gave me
Mm,
access to understanding how automation can really help remove friction or like work ourselves out of tasks that we procrastinate on.
Hmm.
And so what I found is that especially working with neurodivergent entrepreneurs or folks with anxiety or autism is there are things they will avoid. And so I realized there were things I was avoiding that I could automate. And so once I realized I could do that for myself, I started realizing there were so many people I could help that were kind of not as technically inclined as I am, but I can sit
Right.
with them for like a half hour or an hour on like a tech consult and resolve like hours of pain that they're having every month. And it's like, it's hard for me to even want to get paid for that because I just want people to suffer less. So
Right.
it's been a journey for me to actually like raise my rates and charge enough for that. And people have been happy to pay me, which has been, a relief.
And sometimes it's really where you find inspiration is in those struggles. Like I know for a lot of neurodivergent folks, if they are systems inclined, then they can start to build their own systems and work through them and figure out a lot of the missing pieces, but not everyone necessarily is. So it is such a relief when you can have somebody to guide you in designing those systems instead of just giving you a system that's probably not even designed for you, right? Like most of the ones that are put out on Twitter or anywhere else, LinkedIn. These are, not for neurodivergent folks or people who are dealing with like a chronic illness or anything else. They need these kind of alternate ways of learning how to design things. So, what a lot of your clients, do they own small businesses? Are they creatives? Is it kind of a mix?
I would say it's a lot of solopreneurs, a lot of folks
Hmm.
who are kind of in the either coaching or educational space. A lot of them, because I used to be a relationship coach, are in like the
Oh, cool.
somatic, like sex coaching, relationship
Yeah.
coaching, that sort of space. And so we have a shared language around, being a heart centered business, which I would
Yes.
say a lot of like technical business consultants maybe don't come from that lens, or they
Hmm.
definitely don't come from a sex positive lens. So, like, I've
Right.
had BDSM educators come to me and be like, "Thank you for not asking me weird questions," you know? And so I serve people who tend to get kind of marginalized anyway by honestly having enough lived experience to relate to their marginalization that I don't contribute to, making them feel othered. It's just like they can feel like a normal client with me.
Right. And that can really come from all aspects of identity. And I know you've been very open and vulnerable. And I think you really paved the path for other people who are talking about like queer experience and other types of experiences that maybe aren't necessarily, they may be addressed, but they're not necessarily celebrated in the way that you create. So I know this may kind of mix a little bit of both, but I know you've been doing a lot more coaching recently. So I want to talk about the like where does the queer piece come in? Is that more you? Are you working with some queer entrepreneurs? And what is the spicy aspect? Because I actually just read that you put spicy business and content coach. So I want to, because I know you had mentioned you have a lot of heart center entrepreneurs, people who maybe have moved into some of these other spaces. Where does that kind of intersection come in for
Yeah, I
you?
I would say the queer aspect is that a lot of queer people only wanna work with other queer people,
Hmm.
because they know
Right.
that they will not be misgendered or asked any weird questions. Like, sometimes when I work with non-queer people, they will ask me inappropriate questions, and my
Mhm.
customers have the same experience. So we just kind of know that we'll treat each other with respect, and I don't think it's like we exclusively choose to work together, but it tends to feel a little bit safer just to be understood as a baseline.
Yeah.
And then the spicy aspect is I really have been leaning into working with sex positive businesses. So I recently started testing out it's like TikTok meets OnlyFans content creation platform. It's really
Yes.
cool.
Slushy,
Um,
right?
yeah, I've been having tons of fun with Slushy. And so many of my clients are stuck in these awkward little boxes where they can't really say what they do, even though they're literally not doing anything illegal.
Right.
So I have fun like not only educating them on what is the most appropriate way to creatively communicate what you do without getting deplatformed, but also what are the avenues for you to fully say what you do and not get deplatformed. And so it's really exciting to me to serve that population because when I started out doing like online cam work and stuff 10 years ago, there were
Yeah.
no resources. And that is one of the most marginalized communities. Is any kind of like sex positive businesses are usually women owned, queer owned,
Yep.
woman of color owned. And so I have to actively contribute to providing resources for that community because it just frustrates me that they are always left behind by any business resources.
And what happens is it seems to be that a lot of these platforms, even if they mean to do well and they want to help, a lot of these people at first, the more funding they get, the more influence they get from larger banks or from credit card company, whatever that kind of pressure might be from their shareholders if they go public, that's where it starts to get really, really shitty for people who
Mhm.
are try to make a living doing things that are maybe not as common as other types of, I mean, it's the oldest profession,
Mhm.
but whatever, all of the things that you can do. And then, there's also a lot of like a safety aspect, I'm sure too, that you come
Mhm.
across with, people and their identities. And now it's wonderful that there's like so much verification, but at the same time, that's also incredibly dangerous for people who are in that space too.
Mhm.
And what sucks is, I'm sure this is also coming from the marketing perspective. I know you are on multiple platforms, and
Mhm.
I'm also a fan of being on multiple platforms because of the platform risk that you get from anything. I would imagine, especially spicy content, there's a very, very easy scenario where someone might be deplatformed.
Mhm.
If you're coaching some of these maybe new or maybe established spicy entrepreneurs, how do you kind of guide them in navigating some of that?
A lot of it is we'll find creative ways to say it without saying it. Like one of the
Right.
people I worked with was a dominatrix, and I was like, "What if you record ASMR videos of you telling people to drink water today?" And I was
Yeah.
like, "Then they'll get to hear your voice, they'll get to feel your energy, but you're not really doing anything that's not allowed." Because they didn't want to show their face, and I was like, "Well, do a close up of your lips, do ASMR of you just telling people to hydrate." Because you encourage people to like be better people as their dom. So
Right.
and so that was a really fun way for them to show up online because I feel like they feel so defeated. Like, "Ugh, anything I do is going to get me taken down. Like, why would I bother?" And so coming up with those creative and technical solutions for people who aren't really thought of as business owners is such a fun puzzle every time because everyone has different points, of things that they, like, can't do. Like, some people can't show their face for neurodivergent reasons or for legal, spicy
Right.
reasons or whatever, and so that but everyone's like, "You have to show your face, so you're not gonna grow on Instagram." Like, well, that's not true. Lots of people don't.
Right.
Let's get creative instead of just saying it can't be done.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I feel like another piece that I know is often said is you need to have like a specific niche and you need to keep pounding on that particular part. But I would imagine that somebody who is in spicy content, they want to like reach more people, they can actually leverage some of these other interests that they have and bring people into the fold and have them feel that kind of energy. And then, the people who are guided to the next space are guided to the next space. And then if not, they just get to enjoy somebody new and, support them in whatever way that they can.
Mhm.
How do you coach a lot of your people who are multi-passionate? Because I know you are. You're
Mhm.
writing. You're an artist. Like, how do you navigate it, and how do you suggest other people who are multi-passionate kind of navigate their communication?
I would say it has been a challenge for me in a point where I think, reached a burnout, of
Mm.
trying to fit within I was being coached to, like, stick with your niche, Chuck, like, just do social media stuff, don't do your poetry or whatever, and so what I realized was, at least in this, like, latest resource I created, in my video podcasting guide that I just created, I included drawings that I've done, and that really brings more of my personality and uniqueness to it, which is what I help other people do, and I've also noticed that since I brought less of the like, here's 5 hashtags that you need to grow your account, and more like, the algorithm sucks. Like, how do you want to show up online and connect with the 5 people who are actually going to care what you're saying? And like, really being kind of like controversial and anti algorithm, I've been getting 3 times as many followers since I started doing that. So I think I try to think of things as always hypothetical and I will test a
Mhm.
hypothesis. And maybe I'm not going to grow by playing the rules like somebody else, but I am going to learn what's outside of those boundaries, and that's just what I'm here to do, I guess. So I've given up on niching down, to be honest, and
Yeah.
I think I've just decided that, like, empowerment through automation and confidence on camera are kind of my pillars of my content, but I would say I'm still figuring it out, to be honest.
No, I mean, we're all figuring out. I think a lot of people will take advice, from people who are huge and look like they have it all figured out, but they're still figuring it out. They're just figuring it out at a different
Mhm.
place in their life. They're having different challenges in their business. They're having different challenges, like personally at their age, whatever it might be, their stage of life. So I feel like sometimes, it is kind of just where you are on that journey. When you were talking about the burnout aspect too, because I think it's so common that people just think it's extra work is burnout. You're going to burn out by talking about too many things. You're going to burn
Mm,
out, because you're trying to reach too many people. And what I've noticed is any multi-passionate I talk to have said they've burnt out by trying to fit.
mhm,
And that's something that I wanted to point out just because I think, you really hit the nail on the head where sometimes burnout comes from just a lack of alignment or feeling fully expressed where you are. And the fact that you're able to put in yourself and your drawings like into your ebook, I feel like there's just so much like innovation that comes with looking at what's there and either doing the opposite, like you said, just to see what happens, or to see how you can kind of play around the rules. Like you were saying, ASMR, let's do that instead of, doing the logical thing, which might be sexy photos,
mhm,
whatever that might be. You start to get really creative and bend the rules a little bit. I
mhm.
know recently, and this was something I had seen in one of your posts, like you were doing a lot of done for you stuff with your clients. And I've also talked to a few people that have moved away from that just from different experiences. And I wanted to see kind of your experience with that and what kind of you're doing now to engage with the folks that you're working with.
Yeah. So I think for me, I realized that I have to draw a line between what I can do and what I actually want to do because I
Hmm.
can build websites. I can schedule everybody's social media calendars. I can, do a lot of things, but I don't actually enjoy doing those things enough to accept money for them. And when I tried to delegate and build a team, I couldn't find anybody that I could really count on. And so I kept finding myself having to work late to make up for the work that they ended up not doing and the deadlines they missed. And so it just ended up being just way too much stress. And I realized that part of it was I didn't feel like I was valuable enough as just a coach. So I was overcompensating by packing all of my offers with all this done for you stuff. When I realized, like, actually, what I have to offer is extremely valuable.
Right.
And I'm happy to sit with people one on one and teach them this stuff or even plug them into my network of people that do done for you. But I don't have to do every aspect of delivery in order for what I do to be valuable. And so this whole new launch I'm doing is about really getting people amped up for these coaching packages and these journeys I want to walk people through.
You touched on just the wanting to do to be valuable. And that is something I know I've at least experienced a lot of in as a neurodivergent person where I kind of have to almost prove through like almost tangible things or like I need to show you how to do it because I might not perform in the same way as somebody else on a standard exam or a standard job interview, whatever. I usually would kind of wow somebody through an execution or a delivery of something that they were like, I didn't even expect that. You solved that and it wasn't even in the playbook. And
Mhm.
that was amazing. And I would have to do that to show value as opposed to just saying it was valuable yourself. Is there has that been like a coaching experience for you and like creating that sort of confidence in just you? Because I can see it. Like I can say, oh, of course I'd hire Chuck. You know what I mean? To do coaching. But I think a lot of us sometimes are sitting, with ourselves and saying, is, my experience, especially multi-passionate experience, enough? How would you how would you advise some of your clients that maybe are burning themselves out on that type of work, automation or with your offers?
So I think how I started was I wrote down every single thing I was doing. And then I
Mhm.
crossed out all the things that were making me that I was procrastinating. That I could tell, like, oh,
Mhm.
I've really pushed this deadline back over and over again. That's not a thing I should offer. And so once I identified the things that I actually didn't enjoy doing and didn't give me energy, but actually took energy away, it really pared down to I like creating content for free. And I
Mhm.
like working with people one on one who need more guidance after that. And so I just really leaned into those things that give me energy so that I don't continue like pouring from an empty cup. Makes sense.
Totally. So, what are some things I love the topic of energetic management? So,
Mhm,
essentially, like auditing all the things that you're doing and seeing what's giving you energy, what's taking it away, where there's some drains, the things that you were saying, you're avoiding it, it's likely draining you, or
mhm.
the act of avoiding it is draining you. What are some things like for you that you were finding draining? And what were some things that you found like were putting you in flow? And it doesn't have to be work. It can also just be like other things that are in your life.
Yeah. So I'll tell you one of my favorite affirmations that just came out of nowhere is misery doesn't scale. And that's what I often tell
Really?
people who are struggling with social media. I'm like, well, if you hate it, maybe it's not for you. Um, but for me, it was a lot of anything that required back and forth over email over many weeks,
Yeah.
like building a website. So it's like, okay, I built your website. And they're like, great, can you change these 5 things? And then you change the 5 things. And then there's 5 more things. And so what I
Mhm.
realized is I can't stand that back and forth. Like I need to have like discrete tasks that are completed and done. And what I love about the calls is it's contained within that hour or half hour. I send you a follow up with all the links and then we are done. And
Yeah.
if I have my coaching packages for 3, 6 months, whatever, those have discrete containers versus the done for you stuff. It seems like even with boundaries for change requests, people just keep coming back for more. And it just gets exhausting.
Yeah, I think even back in the day, I used to look at, okay, well, it's project based. It's going to be discrete, right? You're like, oh, a website
Right.
or something. You think it's going to be, I don't want to charge hourly. I want to charge like a full rate. And then, I will work on optimizing that as much as possible. And it's discrete and it's done. And then I finish that and I move on to the next thing as opposed to you're usually comparing it to a job where you're kind of almost never done. And
Mhm.
there's things that are always kind of ongoing where you don't actually get to complete them. So it's a step in that direction. But then over time, you start to realize, wait, this doesn't ever feel done either. Or it never feels like there's that great resolution where you're like, oh my God, that was amazing. We both had an amazing exchange. It feels fine and good and everything turned out great. But like near the end, it's like there's all these little pieces that are being wound up and it can be that can create burnout in of itself. So it makes a
Mhm.
lot of sense when you're saying there's the hour and we are accomplishing this in the hour and that's what it is. And if you need more, we add more, but it's now a new kind of experience. So
Mhm.
that was really helpful just in you sharing that because it makes sense that for maybe some people out there who are dealing with maybe that similar feeling of yes, I love the project based, but like, can coaching almost be project based in a
Mhm.
way? So, what do you look for in your coaching clients? Because I know that's probably something you're considering because you don't want to burn out. Take every single person who comes through.
Mhm.
What kind of a coaching client do you look for?
I would say I really do try to pay attention to how I feel I always offer a free planning call. And if I
Mm,
feel that you are really, really anxious or really, really urgent, I've noticed
right.
that that kind of energy can be very, very draining for me. And so I might not work with a person who needs me to be available all the time
Yeah.
and is really going to like need a lot of an energetic pull because I just don't have that much to give. And so it's
Right.
not a good fit. Like, I'm not going to meet your needs if you need someone who's gonna be there for you 24/7 at the drop of like,
Yeah.
if you're but people who are spacious, who are like, "Oh, we can start in 2 weeks," or, especially people who clearly have a vision, but are really struggling with the tangible execution points of like, "Okay, how do I build a content strategy? What should my landing page have on it? Can you look at my landing page?" And then, I can tell them how to, like, move their buttons around and stuff. So people who are open to learning and people who clearly just it's almost like they speak a similar language from a values perspective, but totally
Yes.
different languages from what we do. And so it's clear that
Yeah.
I can help them um, because I have a weird thing that I can do that they can't do. And sometimes I'll end up doing trades with people who are really great coaches, and that has been wonderful.
Yeah, and that's an amazing way of kind of building your network and also seeing who you can work with as well. I know you had mentioned sometimes it's tough to, especially as a solopreneur, especially as a neurodivergent, any sort of identities that you have in there. It starts to sometimes limit who you can work with, the way that you manage your energy. I feel like the way that you approach your process, it's such a big thing that you have to discuss with anyone that you're collaborating with in any sort of space. So I'm sure it's a really interesting way to test out how you refer people or how you end up collaborating with someone in the future is being able to kind of trade and coach with one another.
Mhm.
How do you find like I know that I like to ask this to a lot of creators and entrepreneurs who are building online. How do you build community online? Because I know a lot of people now seeing each other in person again, but there's a lot of people who still live digitally. So how do
Mhm.
you approach that for yourself?
I One of my favorite things to do is to try to give people as many compliments as I can every day. Like when I'm on social media,
Hmm,
I'm looking for people to give compliments to. And I have found that
awesome.
so often just saying like, "Wow, this is a really important conversation. Thanks for bringing this up." Or like, "Ooh, that's a really," giving someone a compliment will often kind of start a relationship that it's not even, I'm not even really doing it for that. I just like to, it's kind of my gratitude practice is just to thank
Yeah.
strangers as often as possible. But the other thing I do is I do participate in a lot of like group coaching containers. And in those group
Right.
coaching containers, I do get to meet other people who have similar values, but different skill sets. And one of my favorite people I know through like a content marketing group, I was going to say something he helped me figure out around energetics is what feels like play. And I realized
Yes.
creating content is actually my creative play. It's actually part of my self care routine to create content. And that made me have such a better relationship with it and actually stop doing such formulaic, boring stuff. I was like, this is my playtime. And like I
Yeah.
said, it's been better since then. But yeah, I met Luke through another coaching container. And some of those are free, some of those are free master classes. Sometimes I'll just like pipe up during a webinar and be like, ooh, what about this? And the leader will be like, hey, great point. And often the leaders of those coaching containers will end up pointing people to me. So I just have noticed you can get a little deeper inside of either groups or coaching masterminds. Um,
Right. You're learning, but then it's like any teacher, any classroom, you're able to contribute and people learn from one another. And so
mhm,
it's a great space to pull in people without having to do the quote unquote like regular marketing tactics or selling tactics.
mhm,
Then the energetics is really interesting too because it goes kind of back to what you were saying. It's like if it's something that you don't actually really want to do, it's not gonna people are gonna feel that, I'm
mhm.
sure. So what mediums do you like? What do you like to do on some of these different spaces? I'm just curious, because I know we probably all have different things like, oh my gosh, I love deep diving and doing a long form newsletter. And then someone else might be like, I love creating, answering questions on TikTok. What do you like to do in some of these different spaces? And how do you play in these different spaces?
It's definitely answered questions. Like I'm in Slack groups on LinkedIn, wherever sometimes you'll see like a major creator post something and then somebody asks a question in the comments on LinkedIn
Mm,
and the creator can't get to all the questions. But sometimes if you answer the question, that person then DMs you and thanks you and then hires you. I love answering questions because I feel like I'll just gravitate to the ones that I know the answer to and I don't have to
mhm.
research it or anything. It's just very quick and easy for me to, share a quick nugget and hopefully like solve a friction point for someone. Um, and I have also found honestly that by asking questions in like,
Yeah.
I used to be part of something called the Idea Collective, which is like 100 different entrepreneurs that meet online. Um, I used to ask questions about how to write a book. I ended up connecting with Precious Williams, who's now a dear friend, my first podcast guest, honestly, like an incredible mentor. And I got that professional connection just by asking a question. So curiosity, I would say curiosity and generosity. That combo can't lose.
Yeah, and it makes sense too because you're kind of taking, out the market research type, where you're looking for, oh my gosh, what does my audience want to hear? You don't have to worry necessarily about that. You can go and just seek, what's out there for that I can answer, that I can give value, where can I serve in some of these spaces? And then it
Mhm,
really just kind of comes back to you because you're giving value in these little spaces and it's a very low barrier to entry to do that. So you don't have to like, well, let me research and let me write this whole article on this. And you don't even know if necessarily people are asking for that at the moment. You just can, it's much easier to just jump on TikTok or Twitter or like you said, LinkedIn and see what creators are talking about. If people have questions. And it just is nice. And I love the compliment thing as well. I mean, it's just kindness. And truly, there's a lot of egotism and not a lot of kindness, on the internet. It's a lot about, let me show you my 7 ways of doing something, which are and there's not a lot of, wow, that was really helpful for me, or wow, I never thought about it that way. What do you think is like a daily ritual or maybe like a quirk that contributes to your success?
mhm. I feel like actually my content creation ritual, a little bit,
Ooh,
like,
I wanna hear about that.
so what I'll do, like today, I had like a little bit of friction with it, but I knew within my launch calendar that it's like the final teaser day for my freebie that's coming out. And at
Yeah.
first, I tried to record a script. I like wrote a script and I tried to record it, and I was like, "Meh, it feels terrible." And then I tried to pick a song to lip sync to, and I was like, "Meh." But then I found a perfect little trending audio, and so I kind of, it's like flow along the path of least resistance. I try to lean into like, where did I just giggle a little bit? Like what? Like how did I just make myself laugh?
Yeah.
Okay, that's the piece I'm going to work with today. And so every day it's kind of about like finding the joke or like finding the radical, transparent joy, or even finding just like the honest rawness of like, I'm having a chronic illness flare up today. Here's what it's like to not be able to get up at 5 a.m. and take a cold shower. And like, I think it's about finding what is true that day, whether it is
Yeah.
joy or rest or whatever, and trying to find the most honest and helpful way to share that. And it feels like a game every day. And it's always fun for me. So yeah, that's always my gift to myself in some ways is making a little video, being a little goofy guy, as I say.
Being a goofy guy, I
Yeah.
love it. You're doing a lot of this really fun short form, but you've been doing long form in the podcast and you're now sharing kind of your wisdom from that. What are some things that you've kind of learned along the way, as you've been recording this podcast? So what episode are you on now?
Oh boy, I've recorded 17 and we just
Yeah.
released episode 11 today.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say the two things it's interesting because I was just writing a guide about this, so this is all top of mind.
Oh,
Um,
perfect.
the two things that I think stand out to me that I've learned are that a lot of people do podcasts as self-promotion and don't think about how to make it an entertaining piece of content.
Mm,
Um, versus I think coming from like an interactive art background and like an improv comedy background, I was like, how can I do this a little differently?
yeah.
The poem thing that I do, that started
I
just
love
because I'm
that.
obsessed with Precious. And I was like, well, if I did it for my first guest, I have to do it for every guest. And
Yeah.
like half the time people cry from and so in some ways, even if the audience doesn't have a transformative experience, the guest always tells me it's one of the best interviews they've had. And part of that is I really studied, do you know who Nardwar is?
No, I don't. Tell me.
He's a guy who interviews, like, punk rockers and hip hop artists, and he's been doing it since, like, the '90s, and he asks
Oh my gosh.
extremely well-researched questions and brings them really specific gifts, like, he blew Snoop Dogg away by bringing him this, like, really, really specific, I think, like, book or even, like, a cassette tape or something,
I
and
love
Snoop Dogg was
that.
like, "How did you find this, and how did you know I would love this?" And Nardwuar does his research. He's a
Yeah.
very goofy guy, and he gives people the most unusual interview of their lives. And that's my goal is like, I don't want this to be like anything you've ever done. With Precious, I was
Right.
like, what questions do you wish people asked you more? Because people talk to Precious and interview her every day and they ask her the same 5 questions. And I was like,
Right.
I'm not going to do that to you, Precious. I want to hear about other parts of your life. And
Right.
it was a great conversation. So I would say if you're going to make a podcast, try your best to find one or two things that you're going to do different than anybody else out there.
You also have to think about the reason why you're doing it too. Like, what is your reasoning behind doing a podcast? Is it the conversations? Is it what kind of put you into like why did it spur you to like decide to do that, to do a podcast?
Well, I started originally because I was going to write a book called Anti-Professional,
Mm,
and I wanted it to be about how to dismantle the concept of professionalism, both in ourselves and in the greater world of entrepreneurship and business. And I realized that my perspective alone was not enough. So initially, I set out to get 10 different perspectives. And then I
right.
realized that one, I loved video podcasting so much that I just wanted to keep going. And two, like there are so many stories that I haven't heard and that I bet other people haven't heard. And
Right.
I've always been passionate about poetry as a way to bridge gaps between communities that don't understand each other through storytelling. And I think podcasting can do the same thing. So
Yeah.
for me, it was partly to elevate stories that I think needed to be told.
These conversations in a social setting, they maybe wouldn't necessarily come up.
Mhm.
They're a little bit more intentional, a little bit more, there's a flow to them that's a little different, a little less, maybe sometimes more random, sometimes less random. But there is something really special that comes out in a very intentional, held space when you're speaking there. What have you learned about yourself in the process, like as a host or as a guest? Like, what have you learned about yourself?
I think I didn't realize that I was doing something so novel when I started, but from the
Mhm.
feedback I've gotten, I realized that I really was coming from it from a very unusual perspective. So that made me feel like, in some ways, when I'm asking people if they want to be a guest, I'm not just asking them to give me something. I'm
Right.
asking if we can collaborate on like a really
Right.
cool thing. So I think my background in like improv and poetry really comes in there in a way that I think maybe other people are just coming from maybe a pure business lens.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I
no, I mean,
I think having that, that multi-passionate thing is a big asset to having a podcast that's maybe a little bit more interesting.
I know we've talked about it. I think I defined it in my own way on your podcast, but I want to know what anti-professionalism means to you.
Mhm,
And it may not be because I'm going to ask you in a little while about everyday innovation
mhm.
for the same sort of a reason, but um, what does it mean to you, or what is it evolving to right now? Because I'm sure with every answer you get, you're like, "Ah, yeah, that too."
Mhm.
Right?
Yeah, I would say anti-professionalism to me is breaking down any barriers that anyone would have to participating in the business space.
Mm.
It is people who have traditionally dominated the space not getting to create the rules for who gets to succeed in professional spaces. It's almost like more than I want to destroy professionalism, I want to destroy what it has been and make something new out of it so that all kinds of people can experience success and not have the story of like, well, I don't belong there.
Right.
So it's the racism, it's the sexism, it's the ableism, it's all of those biases that professional it's really anti-professional bias, I think is what you could accurately call my podcast. But professionalism is so wrapped up in bias. Like I have a friend who has to use his middle name because his first name sounds, too whatever. And he doesn't get job interviews if he uses that name.
Yeah.
So it's like, and those are the things that, with bias, people don't realize they're doing until
Right.
they hear a story of someone it happened to. And that's part of why Anti-Professional as a podcast is important because until you're aware of the bias that other people experience, you can continue perpetuating it. And I don't want to keep perpetuating it. And I hope nobody else does either, because until we shine a light on it, it's really hard to stop.
And a podcast is such a beautiful storytelling tool as well, because just like you would read a book, just start to have empathy and experience. I was just reading about how I tend to be a really big nonfiction reader, but I've been way more into fiction recently because it's just so good for your level of empathy and your ability to walk in someone else's shoes. And that's, I think, something that's really beautiful about podcasting too, because it's a long form space where you get to hear stories and storytelling and someone's perspective, and you get to kind of live in that in the moment without it just being a little bite sized, no context nugget, coming through at you. You actually get to sit and listen to someone share their lived experience or their
Mhm,
lived perspective, the way that they see something. So it is really a gift that you're able to find these people who that you can curate in your own space and then share these conversations so that somebody can experience their brain and their process as well. So what's something that you found like that has connected a lot of the people? Because I know at first you had like a forum and you were like getting some people in to see like um, what their process was, what they thought about professionalism. How are you, what is the thread that you're seeing through some of your guests?
I think I would say the largest thread is that there are so many people who are business owners and entrepreneurs that we don't think of as business owners,
Mm,
like witches. Like there's so many witches who are business owners and,
yeah.
sex workers who are business owners. And even, I met someone who's like an adulting coach. Like they're a coach for young people to
Oh
teach
my gosh,
them.
I love that.
It's so
I
cute. She
love
was
that.
she was the podcast guest this week, Sarah Deacon. She's adorable. And the other thing I found is that a lot of people who are in the entrepreneurship space who end up on my podcast are actually very deeply spiritual people, all from
Hmm.
different spiritual faiths. And I love getting to share that thread that we all have. I don't really know what you would call my spirituality. I kind of pull from everything. So I can
Yeah.
kind of get deep with like a Christian or a Buddhist or whatever because I've read pretty
Yeah.
much all the texts. And so it's been really fun to find out the spiritual passion behind why so many people get into business because you don't get into business because it's easy. It is a leap of
No.
faith, no matter where your faith is coming from. And
Right.
there's so much perseverance and bravery in the people that have come on the show because they're all doing something that they were told they shouldn't or couldn't do. And I think that's really exciting.
It is. And, I think you were talking about the heart centered or soul centered entrepreneurs, and that a lot of that does end up coming into the coaching space. And I think what's so interesting is I think more important more now than ever because of the whole AI aspect, which I love AI. I think it's amazing. I know you do too, but that's even more of a chance for us to lean into the spiritual aspect. I find all of it totally connected. The brain, quantum physics, all of the different spaces and the way that we create and the way we use tools like technology to like create a spiritual experience, because we're able to literally manifest something into form in a digital space, which is much easier than doing it sometimes physically.
Mhm.
So it's really interesting to hear that that's been something that has been, um, a factor that has gone through all of the entrepreneurs that you're talking to. And it shows that these are probably the people who are going to be very, very resilient to the changes in technology or
Mhm.
contexts. These are the people who are going to probably build that next professional space, as you were talking about. Um, so what, as far as like, how does the spirituality play in like your kind of everyday approach to your business? Like how do you have like rituals that you go through? Is there something, do you have like a reflective practice? How does that show up for you?
It's interesting because I feel like at certain points in my life, I was a lot more tapped in to my spiritual source. Um,
Yeah.
and with some like really major disruptions with my spiritual community last year when I left Portland, it kind of made me abandon my practice in a lot of ways. And
Mm.
I became a lot more pragmatic. But I will say I have felt that deficit in and I felt
Mm.
like I'm missing and almost like I want to sort of like open myself back up. And I think through actually the poetry that I've been doing on the podcast, that has been
Yeah.
a perfect flow state. Like I don't edit it. I just write what comes out. And with almost all my writing, I don't really take credit for it. It more feels like it's, the universe coming through me. And I think that practice has been good for opening me back up to my, the source that I'm tapped into. And then, over here, I actually have a candle that I burned yesterday. I've been working with a lot more spiritual business coaches and witches
Yeah.
and doing spells and lighting candles. And I love, do you know what scripting is?
Yes. Yes.
Scripting is something I never gave up. I love scripting. I did some
Oh,
yesterday. I have a really specific meditation I do. I would say ecstatic dance is also big for me. And sometimes I'll do that
oh,
for my content.
yeah.
I think it's a lot of getting out of my analytical mind, which it's too easy for me to
Yep.
get stuck in sometimes. But it's letting go and getting into the flow in whatever medium makes sense for the day. Painting, making jewelry, like there's a lot of creative stuff I do that I think taps me into that.
Yeah, and it's also in that same vein of energetic management, a lot of that's the stuff that's kind of fills your cup back up again so that you can go and give and answer those questions and provide the value. It's having those kind of grounding and or expansive exercises. Sometimes you get a little bit stuck in things that you like movement, any sort of dance does that, at least for me. And getting myself out of my own head, moving around. So I totally understand that. And that's probably a very common thing that people can, a very helpful thing that people can do to get those kind of creative juices flowing and get out of that like anxious comparisonitis type
Mhm.
of feeling that you can sometimes get from social media. So I wanted to ask you too, because I know you had asked me on your podcast um, about anti-professionalism. I have a lot of my things are called everyday innovation, and a lot of it is somewhat about innovation in and of itself, which doesn't even really have a distinct definition. It's really essentially just it depends on the context of what it is. Um, and I like to say that there's personal aspects, professional aspects. I want to ask you, like, what does everyday innovation mean to you? It can be a definition, it can be how it shows up in your life. I'm just curious as to your personal response. There's no right answer. Everything's right. I've heard amazing answers that are totally all over the place, and I absolutely love it.
I think I can hear two things coming up for me. One is it's a part of my personality that if someone tells me I'm not supposed to do something, I have to do it. And I like I mentioned before, I'll do that from a hypothetical perspective. Like, but what if I do this? What if
Hmm.
I, do X, Y, Z that you're not supposed to do? Because I have to know. I have to validate that that really can't or shouldn't be done. And I think innovation can come from playing beyond the edge of what you're allowed to do. But I also really, especially with AI and creativity, I like to encourage people to go beyond what is known. In my
Mm,
podcast, I try to ask people questions I've never been asked before because maybe they've never even thought about it. Maybe this incredible thought leader has never been able to articulate this extremely nuanced thing. So if something is already known, I'm not satisfied. I have to go
right.
beyond what is known and learn what is past the edge. Of what
actually just learned this term like in the past couple of months, but having high agency,
Mm.
knowing that if somebody says you can't do something, usually high agency people, they're the first to question, how can I get around that? Or how can I control that? How can I not be a victim of the circumstance and find
Mhm.
a new way of doing it? And I find you to be very high agency, even just in the answers that you are giving on coaching your clients as well and finding new ways to pivot and move around kind of the changing context, which in and of itself is a form of resilience.
Mhm.
And I think that's also a big part of everyday innovation too, is being resilient and continuing to do your thing.
Well, yeah, and it makes me think about how everyone has this narrative that we're at the mercy of the algorithm. And it's like, well, is that
Uh,
really true? And isn't the algorithm like designed by all of us? So if we all believe that we're at the mercy of the algorithm and play into what we think the algorithm wants, then aren't we sort of validating that? Uh, like the algorithm should be working for us. It's the product. We're the consumers. Is how I feel.
Exactly. AI is also, it's machine learning. It's learning from people. A lot of people don't want, I remember in the beginning, we're kind of like hesitant to use it. Well, I don't know about the information that's coming from it, and it could be biased. I said, well, then why aren't you contributing to it?
Mhm.
You can contribute your expertise. You can contribute aspects, that by asking it questions and getting responses and sharing your responses or correcting it, you're able to, influence, literally influence something, that is a kind of almost public domain space that people are using. Why wouldn't you want to talk about some of these accessibility things or queer entrepreneurship or whatever that might be? Or as an artist, do you want to share a little bit about your process so that AI can understand what's human, what's that? There's a whole lot of things that I think people just feel like you said, they're at the mercy of whatever when really they can change it. It only takes I'm sure things that go viral that are very human, very unexpected. And why is that? It's because people actually like it. And
Right.
then, all of a sudden, sometimes these things start to do better. And it was not because the algorithm decided, it was because people decided.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's what I'm
So
doing
I
it for. I'm doing it for people, not for the algorithm. And I'm doing it for my people, not all the people.
right. And then knowing your people and finding your people. And so a question I like to kind of pose too is I like things to be kind of two-way. And I want responses on YouTube or even in the Q&A on Spotify. I want it to be not just feedback on the episode. I want them to answer something from you. Is there something that you have a question, or if you have any multiple questions, whatever you'd like, is there something that you want to pose to the audience that you would actually like a response about? It can have to do with things that they're dealing with as an entrepreneur. It could be something totally personal, like what's your favorite song? It could be anything that you want. I just want to put that out there so that people have a prompt and that they can respond to you as a guest.
I feel like I need some time to articulate this, but what's coming up is what's something that you're afraid to do that you secretly know you have to do?
You actually phrased that
Okay.
perfectly,
I think
but
it came through.
that's an amazing question because that kind of goes back to your avoidance piece, maybe too, and why you're avoiding it. If it's something that is it something that you should, or maybe it's something that you don't do.
Mhm.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah, and I think it's something I've had to tackle a lot of like, I know that there's something great inside of me that needs to be shared, but I also feel confused and scared about it. But I'm still trying to show up for it every day.
Yeah, and the confusion part is, I think, something that we need to discuss more as like a general public that most of the time we're a little bit confused.
Mhm.
Everybody says they go for this immense clarity in all that they do. While I mean, I personally feel most of the time I'm just trudging forward. I think I have a North Star, but a lot of times it's incredibly confusing.
Mhm.
Like, but that's kind of I feel like that's the beauty and the mystery of life. If you knew what was gonna happen, then there's no magic and there's no
Right.
fun.
And I think because I'm a solid improviser, people don't think that I doubt myself or get
Yes.
scared. But like after I perform, I have such an immense amount of adrenaline running through my body that I will often like shake or have to sit down or leave the building. But it's like on
Wow.
stage, I look like, a super, confident, present person. But afterwards, it's like I just ran so much through my body that I am now exhausted. It's like nobody is impenetrable. And everybody is masking to some degree. So yeah, I don't know. People sometimes see me as like confident and unwavering, but I am extremely, extremely wavering.
Honestly, improv and life really go well
Oh,
together,
yeah.
just especially because of the yes and like mentality. I feel
Mhm.
like I've taken that from I haven't really done improv, but I've done things that are adjacent. So I love the concepts of it and I love it in being an entrepreneur. What are a couple things just to kind of we can close this out, but I just love ending on this idea because I think it really encapsulates a lot of the reason why you're very high agency, artistic, and you're able to coach really well. What are some things from improv that you've learned that are really great for making those innovative decisions in your everyday life?
I would say one of my greatest improv mentors, Rita Parrish, taught me to follow your legs. So sometimes when you're standing in the wings for an improv show, you do not know what you're going to say when you walk on
Yeah.
stage, but your legs told you to just walk. And so you got to
Mhm.
follow your legs. And I think I follow that most of the time. Like if whether I'm showing up for a speaking gig or posting content, like I just get that little urge and I just listen to it. And I don't question it. I don't ask why. I don't even know what I'm gonna do. But I follow my legs to whatever destination they're telling me to go to and I just show up for whatever I see there. I think that's really big. And the other massive thing from improv, there's no such thing as failure because everything's made up. So if
Mm.
you feel like you just messed up in front of everyone, first of all, probably nobody noticed. And second of all, if they did notice, they probably don't care. And third of all, every second that passes since that time you messed up, people care less. So
Right.
just mess up. Like and I always say, you got to fail to scale. Like go make a mess. Go learn something. Like there's no stake. There are stakes, but there's no stakes. You know.
It's true, and sometimes the recovery is even more incredible than if you had done it
Mhm.
correctly, which there's no correct, like you said, but, oh, I love I love both, the follow your legs and also that everything is made up,
Everything's
really,
made up.
because it is. It's a and like you said earlier, it's a game.
Mhm.
It's a game to be played. It's a game that is yours, and it's something that I'm really appreciative that I've had this conversation with you just because I think you're showing people who maybe have not felt that the game was for them, that they can play it too, and they just have to play it a little bit differently. Thank you so much. I love that you've come on. Please check out my episode. It was episode number 7. Can't wait for this to come out. We're also going to have, and we'll be chatting about this soon, Chuck, a Notion document that'll go along with this episode with a couple little exercises. So I want to share that, and of course your calls to action. So please check out the show notes and the Notion document for those. But where can we find you just in a general space? What's the best place to find Chuck?
I would say I'm very responsive on Instagram. I'm at Magical Weirdo Chuck. Um, you can check out the Anti-Professional podcast. And then my website is magicalweirdo.com, where you can sign up for my newsletter. And that's where you'll get early access to all my freebies and learn about all the other stuff I'm doing.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much for being
Yeah.
here. And I look forward to hearing answers to your question.
Yeah, I can't wait. I can't wait. Thank you so much, Jordan, for having me. And can't wait for our next conversation.
Yes, thank you.